Hey everybody, Sean Albertson here. Welcome to our virtual panel. We've got some experts in customer experience that are joining me today that we're going to really talk about the state of customer experience today. We know it's changing. There's a lot of stuff going on really ultimately about how are we going to use AI and technology and data in this new age. And it's putting a lot of traditional work that we've done in customer experience on its head and a little bit. But we're going to talk through that as a team and share some insights about, how did we get here and then where are we going from our perspective. So again, happy to introduce this great panel today. And we're going to start on my Brady Bunch view on my top left. So Roberta, maybe if you'll introduce yourself and kind of briefly summarize what you think the state of CX is today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean. I really appreciate being on this panel and giving some advice and perspective. I have been in the CX space for at least 20 years. Back in my days with General Electric and product development, where we were doing market research studies and looking at customer personas and building those out and looking at how do you service those customers in a different way. But I have been on and off consulting for the last 10 years, both on the vendor side and also the client side. I have a passion to bring customers' point of view, feedback, VOC into the boardroom or into any decision making that a company is making. Because I think oftentimes they have forgotten about what the result is on the customer when they're making changes. So I'm a big proponent for change management and change management methodologies to help drive culturally. How do you keep the customer primary in all decisions?
Awesome.
And I
Well,
think, oh,
no, go ahead.
okay, edit that part. I think with the state of CX in today's time and how it's evolved over the years, has gone from a sales and marketing approach to a more technical IT and financial approach. And especially with the technology these days and how companies are leveraging various tools to service customers in a more efficient and more streamlined way and more cost efficient way as well. But I think sometimes we're missing out on that human connection with our customers, and we can talk more about that coming up. But I do see that huge evolution happening, and it's quicker in the last 4 years than I've ever seen any kind of evolution of servicing customers in the past.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. Change is rampant, and we'll talk more about that as well. But Wei, if you don't mind introducing yourself as well to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again, Sean, for this great opportunity with this group of panelists. So I'm Dr. Wei Wu Curtis, and much like Roberta, I've also been on both sides. I've spent probably the last 20 years being on kind of the client side, owning and running my own contact centers globally, and recently has switched over to the vendor side, and then now have had the opportunity to start my own BPO organization, and we specialize in obviously contact center operations. And where I kind of see CX, I've moved around. I think I've touched every single industry you can possibly think of, and I think I've done that approach. One, because the first time you're successful in any industry, you just think, is it me or is it just a fluke? And so I decided, okay, I'm going to go from, financial institutions to now let's just go over to hospitality. And if I can be successful here, let's just let's go to utilities. And so what I've realized that CX is such a huge pendulum, right? But to your point, Roberta, I think it has really moved very rapidly in terms of the technology play. It's gotten much more complex. It's become more of a science. And the technology and the data play is huge. And I think as practitioners, and I'm going to generalize this, I think our colleagues are falling a little bit behind because we depend on IT and data analysts to kind of help us interpret that information on how we need to run our operations. But we need to also understand it deeply because it impacts our ability to operate and to deliver CX well. And so we have a kind of a vested interest to continue to learn as much as we can to be able to continue to drive what's right in that CX space.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's again, we're going to hit on that one a ton, I guarantee you, as we go through. Stacy.
Yes, hello. So I am a keynote speaker, author, and advisor, founder of Doing CX Right, which is focused on helping companies secure unbreakable connections. That is my mantra. And that's with their customers and workforce for lasting retention. Having come from very big organizations, different industries, there's so much fragmentation and silos and communication inconsistencies. It's all a blame game when problems arise rather than really owning an accountability to fix the customer issues. And so I'm coming in with my toolbox. I'm speaking, educating through my book, through 2 LinkedIn learning courses that are live, and so much peer-to-peer education on how do you really sustain those unbreakable connections for lasting loyalty.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for joining me today. And this is going to be a great discussion. And I actually want to pull a little bit on what you said. You said that, a lot of more traditional CXers are falling behind. That makes me think, maybe there's we kind of have to own up to we haven't been keeping up and so forth and so on. But pull on that thread a little bit more. When you think about falling behind, what part of it do you think CXers have fallen behind a little bit?
Yeah, I think whenever I enter into like the various industries and stuff, I think, when I get introduced to varying leaderships and stuff, they do very well for themselves in terms of learning a specific industry. But I always tell people you have to kind of get outside your 4 walls. And so when you think about the plethora of availability of reporting and information and data, like they don't do anything with it, right? And so when I go down the list of all the KPIs and the reports, like, what do you do with it? And it just gets delivered, or they have to answer to certain anomalies and stuff, but they don't really use it strategically to look at it and say, okay, well, how is this going to fundamentally help drive certain business decisions? And how is this going to help me create the contact center rather than as a huge business expense? How is this going to help me redefine, recreate, and evolve it into really kind of a strategic partnership for the rest of the organization? It's a very different way of thinking about it that's a bit more proactive than reactive. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where we have a huge opportunity as practitioners and as leaders within this space to get out there to, learn more and absorb more and figure out how we can get in front of many of these issues.
Stacy, where would you take that same kind of thought process? Where have we fallen behind?
I believe the challenges, even the example that Wei said, is because of the internal fragmentation. And people are not understanding across the organization their role, their more than responsibility, but accountability to customer experience. And that's my keynote speech. It's really about how do you make every organization be accountable regardless of their job title. And then when you have everybody really owning their parts of the customer journey, but understanding the domino effect, then the customer sees it and feels it. It's consistent, it's seamless. And fundamentally, what I know from working in companies is that the marketing department will, let's say, put out a promotion. Well, the customer calls customer care, and that rep has no idea what that promotion is. So that's what I'm getting at. That's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, because I like to say the same thing. Customer experience, good customer experience, or all customer experience is everyone's responsibility. But here's the problem. When it's everyone's responsibility, it's also no one's responsibility. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of many of the challenges. So Roberta, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Definitely the whole silos, breaking down silos, having accountability across is very difficult because you're also talking about change, right? Cultural change and change in what people own up to and what metrics that they're responsible for. And I have found that a lot of organizations have implemented metrics because they felt like they had to implement metrics. And from the discussion around data and insights, companies are so used to just reporting metrics for the sake of reporting metrics. They're forgetting about what do you do with that information? Just like what Dr. Way said. What are they doing with it? What are those insights that can truly drive the change within each of those departments? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, companies want to grow, right? They want to make more money. That's the bottom line. And when you've got retention issues with your customers, that's where you really need to dive into and understand what are those key levers to help keep and retain those customers longer, and understanding those insights and being able to communicate them across the entire organization, like Stacy said, to help your employees and your departments know and understand what's in it for them in order to drive those changes they need to make in their department to ultimately affect the retention to grow the company. It's just a cyclical balance that it's always a dance, right, with the leadership team on doing that. So that's where I love to come in and help them understand that bigger picture and the bigger effects of what one is doing versus what the other hand is doing, and how that can ultimately affect their growth strategy.
Yeah, I want to add on to what Roberta just said, which is when I was in one particular company, my team had a set of customer experience metrics. Our objectives were, my paycheck was tied to them. The other departments did not. And it made it absolutely impossible for when my team would come to those teams with really good voice of customer data and say, hey, e-commerce team, we've got to fix this part of the experience, the online experience. Hey, retail team, we've got to fix this part. Different parts of the organization didn't make it a priority because they had different goals.
And sometimes
So
they're conflicting.
absolutely. In fact, e-commerce team and the retail team, yes, they were very different. Like those are our sales. No, those are my sales. So yes, what you just said, Roberta, is so important. It's beyond just goals for goals, but it's that unified goal.
Yep.
Absolutely. Well, and yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, if all you're doing is measurement for measurement's sake, there's nothing to it. And I think that's something that, you know, as we were talking about this, and as we've been talking about this, the opportunity for a lot of CXers is it's harder work than what they're potentially maybe used to. So one of the fall behind is what you guys said. Too much focus on measuring a metric and not finding an actionable insight to make change, both for the organization as well. And some of that's a challenge because the business models are very different too. You know, CX, over my career, I've done CX, but I've done it from the contact center. I've done it from marketing, from product and pricing, from IT and from digital. I've done all the X's really across organizations. And every time I was in one department, it was hard to get those other departments to really align. So we just kind of outlined the problem. How have you seen, good CX professionals bridge that gap and drive a greater change? Maybe, Wei, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I'll draw on an experience, a recent experience, and I'll use utility as an example. Very staunchy, very conservative industry and stuff, and it was extremely challenging. But call centers, we speak our own language, right? We have our own KPIs, and we talk about service levels and abandonment rates, and so we have our own lingo, just like every department does. And so as I was going around and doing kind of these all staff presentations about, what the vision and the strategy is coming into the organization, I didn't talk about any of that stuff, right? but really sharing the vision in terms of why CX was so important. Why it was everyone's responsibilities, why it was misaligned with the rest of the organization. Like when you think about utilities, we don't think about power as some entitlement thing, right? We just expect it to turn on and it works. And so like reliability was huge. Yeah, we expect it to be reliable. And so this particular company scored very, very high, top quartile, top decile in terms of reliability. But that's all they cared about. But then when it came to like customer experience, we consistently ranked in the bottom quartile. And so there's huge inconsistencies. So you can be extremely reliable, but people hated the company. And so how do you balance those things out? And so being able to explain it in terms that made sense to the rest of the organization and the rest of the leadership team. So I think they really appreciated having a very different perspective and explaining it not in typical call center terms, because the report outs would be, here's our service level, here's our banner rate, here's how many people we had, here's our attrition. That's meaningless to them. How does this impact their division, their world? What do they get out of it? And how do we best partner on things? And, something that both Stacy and Roberta alluded to, which is, the splintering of departments. Like, how do we share in terms of this journey, in terms of upstream and downstream impacts, and come together as a collective in terms of achieving objectives for the organization? And so I think that's where we kind of have to be the champions of that strategy and bringing the pieces together and helping interpret our getting outside of our language and our KPIs to something that's more meaningful from a business objective.
I think going back to shifting your culture, bringing those teams together, bringing departments together to make that collective, like Dr. Wu was saying, or Wei, sorry, Dr. Wei was saying. And I think when you think about the evolution of the customer experience professional over the last few years or last 10 years, you've gone from a project manager type person, very analytical, metrics driven, process driven, and looking at getting projects done and implementing things, to now you're struggling with bringing people together and culture and driving change and being that change agent. And that takes a different type of skill set, I think. And it's hard to find people that can do both that strategic discussion and bringing together the collective versus the tactical project manager. Go implement the NPS score, go implement a metric, go start discussing the metrics as well and analyzing a data analyst type of role. And I really feel like the last 4 to 5 years, now that CX professional also has to be a tech person, right? Be able to communicate and speak to the IT team in their language and how to influence and become a strong influencer to drive their initiatives through or bring people together. So I just think it's really interesting right now with what the skill set and what that CX person is today. They look very different today than they did 10, 15 years ago.
Stacy, what would you add?
Yeah, I want to compliment to what Roberta said as well just now, which is, so back in corporate, the IT department was great at getting solutions and technology for the departments and stakeholders. I was one of the stakeholders. And I went to IT and said, I need a solution. Where our agents are talking to customers and doing these phone surveys. Yes, phone, not email, believe that or not, it worked. Anyway, and this was a big high ticket cost item. These were elevators and construction. Anyway, so we go to IT and they said, well, what do you need? I said, well, these are the requirements we need to be able to do our jobs better and get that customer voice to the different departments to take action. And they said, well, we actually have a solution for you. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, that other department already gave us what they need. And so we're rolling it out across the whole company. And I said, well, that's great, but you didn't get our requirements. our team. So that's not going to work. Point of story is that I was speaking to IT teams and security teams to help them understand that their internal customer is that they own that being the glue to the experience, because not only did it cost more money to renegotiate that contract that didn't fit our team's needs, but also it delayed time. The rollout to our team was like 6, 7 months. There was no way we were going to meet our customer goals. So what I'm trying to say is that IT, HR, marketing, sales, everybody internally is where I'm bringing them together to literally map out the customer journey from their angle, design it, optimize it, validate it with real customers, and then fill those gaps. So everything everybody just said, it's a real example where when you don't bring everybody together and help them understand the domino effect and get out of their silos, that's how change happens.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like, as all three of you describe this, it sounds like the future CX professional is a unicorn. I mean, something very unique, because you've got to be a technologist, you've got to be almost a quasi data scientist, you've got to be a change agent, you've got to be a communicator and a collaborator and an influencer. You've got to understand all parts of your business. It seems a little overwhelming, for that, and for the audience that might be listening in going, I'm not that, but I want to be back to that. Maybe some thoughts on recognition, or what you would say is, focus here as part of the learning process to evolve into really ultimately what is this new, regardless of what department you're in, this new CX professional may not even be called CX, but this new professional. How would you get to that next level, and how would you start to grow in your own experience as you're moving forward as a group? So who'd like to start with that?
So this is in line with the book that's coming out later this year, which is all around experience management. And it's no longer just about customer journey mapping. This is about experience management, the whole ecosystem. And so someone really learning how to design the experience from all the different angles, I would call it omni-channel, really knowing how to design that, look at what is, and then bring your partners into defining what that is. And then understanding, this is more of the research, to validate with real customers that what you designed in those micro moments, those interaction points, customer service is absolutely a huge part of the journey, but it's not the journey. That's where I would say is really learn about experience management.
I would just piggyback on that. You're not going to find it in a person that just came out of college. Let's just be clear about that. I think you have to find a person who has had the experience across multiple industries, across multiple departments, who has had that global holistic experience within an organization. And I just have to brag on General Electric. I just have to for 1 second. Being a Lean Six Sigma black belt in their quality department allowed me to be able to work across those silos and bring those people together and gain those skills and be able to identify and understand what's important for each of those areas, with mapping out processes, gathering customer feedback to validate, gathering the data to analyze and see where the problems were lying. And so I have to go back to that experience that I had as a black belt, leveraging those tools that you learn to be able to become that strong influencer and project manager and communicator has been, I think, priceless in my career. And it takes time. It takes time for someone to get that momentum, that confidence, that skill set to be able to go in and drive the change that's needed. So you won't find it in the 20 somethings. I'm going to say that.
Yeah, I would say, like I agree with you, Sean. It is a bit of a unicorn, right? The most effective leaders are going to have a little bit of all of those of the skill sets that you just explained. Um, I would say, how do you get started? It's the power of networking, right? It is going outside your four walls, meeting different people within the industry that have different skill sets. You're going to find people that are experts within the workforce management field. You're going to find experts in the operations field. You're going to find experts in the IT field, right? Build those connections. And like, I don't hesitate to call on any of these experts to be able to kind of brainstorm things. And they're fantastic about, okay, help me understand, why is this particular thing so important, right? And they're going to walk you through it. Or I have this situation. How do I politically maneuver around X? And so getting guidance from kind of, I call it my board of advisors, is kind of like the first step. You know, get their learnings, get their experiences, but more importantly, be open to learning a lot of it and be open to being okay with making some mistakes along the way. And now taking that and now applying it to your own workplace and then continually course correcting it. And I would also say too, is like, yeah, you can read, you can read books, you can read magazines, you can go to conferences and all that stuff. There's so many different resources out there. But, to me, I have 5 kids. I don't have a lot of time. And so I'd rather just go straight to the source, talk to the person. I'm like, what did you do? What was your biggest mistake? What were your learnings? And go from there. So I would say the people connection is probably the most valuable piece of where to start for me when it came to my learning as I was kind of going through the different parts of the operations and learning as much as I could about how to effectively run contact centers around the world.
I'd love to add something to that, which is for people listening, make sure that you choose the right room. What I mean by that is I've been in companies where they brought me in to work as an employee, and out of one side of their mouth they said, go drive the change. We're not a customer centric company. Make it happen. Great. I'm here to do that. But then the other side of their mouth said, Stacy, you're too fast. Slow it down. And I'm like, well, which Stacy do you want? So make sure that you work for a company that really is committed to the change and supports it, embrace it, and funds it, because otherwise you're going to be running in circles.
Yeah, I definitely agree with some of the challenges of circles and circle running, very common. And I think what you guys have all hit on too is that, being, a really good, incredible CX practitioner, it doesn't matter what your title is. It doesn't matter, what your role is at an organization. It's almost more an attitude, because I think ultimately CX is not a role or a department. It's a way of doing business. And you're either CX doing business, because you want to do it based on the customer and being customer centric, or not. But I think the other key, and Dr. Wei, you hit on it as well, is CX is a team sport. It is definitely not a solo sport. And so the skills that I see in the best CX leaders have nothing to do with their knowledge about customer experience processes. It's more about they can influence, they collaborate, they drive conversation, they try to make sure that it's a shared event, not just a single, this is my job. And I think that's where, going back to where we started, some of where we fell down a little bit as in the CX profession was too focused on a survey and a metric and not enough on what is that measure? What's measuring the experience to make change? And so now with AI and new technology and things like that, I think we're going to be able to do more with less and be more efficient because of the new tech that's coming. And so maybe let's branch into that a little bit. So now if we think about this future of what CX looks like because of deep data understanding, AI, and technology, what do you guys foresee as being kind of where we go? Maybe Roberta, you start for us this time.
No, I think you definitely touched on something there with the person being a collaborator, communicator versus knowing in depth the different areas. Because with the tech that comes, I think you are going to see more companies having less CX professionals and CX teams, and it's going to be owned by everybody within the organization or within even just IT. And IT is going to be driving a lot of those experiences, and there already are, with online experiences, the AI chat, all of that. So I think that's going to really change the way all companies do business. And they're going to have to change their focus on how they're going to get the growth that they need to get and where do they get it from.
Yeah, I think that the topic of AI can't avoid it. At the same time, we need to acknowledge that people are fearful. And for employees, agents, every human, we can't pretend that people are fully embracing. They get thrown a lot of technology and expected to embrace it, but the reality is they're afraid, whether they're afraid for their jobs, whether they're afraid about actually using it, security, all those reasons. So I think it's important that companies acknowledge that, support the fear, the psychological safety, so that people use the technology that saves them time and gives them the ability to interact more with customers. But that fear factor is real. And I see too many companies saying, too bad, embrace it. And it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I've seen kind of peaks and valleys of this stuff, and technology being one of them. And like I've been in organizations where I've asked the leadership and the management team is like, where do we go next? How did you make certain decisions in terms of what systems and platforms were going to be integrated and used, and what does the technology roadmap look like? And they're like, well, that's IT's job. I'm like, no, it isn't. It's like, no, it's your job, because it touches and impacts your operations, right? It was like a whole different mindset. And IT comes to me and they're like, no, it's our job. So we're going to tell you what's next and what's most important. I'm like, no, you're not, right? And like, I just need IT to tell me, can you plug this widget into that widget, and is it gonna work? But in terms of driving strategy, it should be our jobs to know, what does CX need to look like in the future. Every organization I've been a part of, and Stacy, I totally feel your pain, which is like, I want you to come in and I want you to drive CX. We want to have the best experience. And then when you get in, it's like a huge uphill battle, right? Nobody's giving you a blank check. In actuality, they're actually cutting your budget. And so how do you take that kind of environment and try to scrimp, but yet they want you to deliver something for nothing? And so with that in mind, I would say with AI, with all these kind of bells and whistles, like executive team is always going to say, great, AI is here. We can get rid of half the call center. Wishful thinking, right? It's because when you actually look at the solution, it's because we have on-premise solutions, we have bad data, we have homegrown systems. We're not ready for it yet. And so there's a lot of homework we need to do in terms of what's the right technology to integrate, what makes sense in terms of where to start with AI. And I think there's a lot of utility with how we can leverage AI internally first to see kind of where it would work best to really kind of help our employees best. Because we're just seeing, we continue to see frustration and attrition and training challenges. And so I think we need to be a bit more thoughtful in terms of how and where we approach it. But ultimately, the name of the game, and people often say too, is like, where do you think AI is going to go? I said, it's going to go to whatever company is going to be the earliest adopters and how they're going to use it. And so I often use the example of Uber. Nobody knew we really wanted the technology of tracking where our driver was or who our driver was or knowing the make and model or when they were going to come and pick us up. But yet that technology in that company fundamentally changed the whole face of transportation. And now today we can't live without it. And other industries are adopting that same technology, right? And so now consumers have a different expectation. So they expect everybody to kind of have that Uber-esque experience. Well, great. You're going to come in and replace my windshield, but where are you? I want to know where you're at. I want to know what the drivers, what driver's coming from a safety perspective. And from a timing perspective, I want you to respect my time. And so those types of companies, whatever they do with AI, whatever that next big shiny thing is, whoever the early adopters are going to set that pace and everybody else is going to follow. And I think that's kind of where we are with technology.
So, two things. One, to your Uber story, I think there's also a very interesting trend that they started where the company is rating the customer, the 5 stars or the 4 stars. Like we get out, we rate the driver, but they're also rating us. And I think that that's a very interesting thing we can spend an hour on by itself. Secondly, many of my friends in the companies I worked for in the CX divisions have been let go. So that reality is heartbreaking. But at the same time, I think that we've got to get very sophisticated on showing the value. And it's not easy like e-commerce, right? The cash register goes off when you give the credit card and you get to the confirmation page. CX doesn't work like that. So the ROI of CX is where we have to get smarter.
Oh, I was going to say not only smarter, but quicker, because that's what they want. They want to see those quick wins and quick results and quick, turnaround. And I think that's the misnomer that some leaders have, that you come in, just like what Dr. Way said, you come in, and same with you, Stacy, you come in as a CX professional and you're being told one thing there on board. You go to try and drive change and it's impossible because either the culture or the data is not available or whatever, and you need to implement something. And they wonder 6 months down the road, why isn't there an impact on their NPS score or an impact in their revenue growth? They need to understand not only does it take time, but how can we incrementally make smaller changes that are impactful and measurable in a shorter amount of time, for sure.
So yeah, absolutely. I think we've hit on so many really incredible topics here, and Dr. Way, I'll fully agree with you. Ebbs and flows, changes over time. I call it the pendulum. Right now, it's swinging towards IT doing more of the work because they actually do the tech and they have data scientists in their group, depending on their structure. But it's going to swing back because they don't have the human understanding. They don't have the real experience understanding. So what I'd say is, as we're going forward, the CX person, again, may not be called that in the future, is more important now than ever before. It's about creating strategies around experience to drive real impact to the customer and the return on investment. The key there being, as you mentioned as well, Roberta. But ultimately, it's also, as I said earlier, it's a team sport. So one of the things I'd like to recommend everybody be a part of, so we're building a community where we're going to talk monthly with CX practitioners and professionals, with experts like those on the call today, and we're going to learn and grow together in this new environment of customer experience. So join us. We're calling it CX on the Rocks. So if you go to cxontherocks.com, enter your information for the mailing list, and after the new year, we're going to continue these kind of discussions and learn so much more about what's going on. And so if you're someone who really wants to learn and understand the new age of customer experience, join us. So thank you all, ladies. Thank you for joining me today and sharing such great information with the audience. And we hope that you all have learned a lot and will take some really good things with you in your career today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.